What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show. As always, I like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. I'm the host of Epic Conversations, and this is a place for Epic Conversations. I'm also the 2018 award winner in the innovation category, handed out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. And you know, I always like to have new friends on the Dr. Vibe show. And it's always good too when you have someone who we've known of each other, but we've never known each other for the last number of years. And it never seemed that we would cross paths, but it's finally happened. And this, believe it or not, this is one of the bucket list things I wanted to do online, because for those who may or may not know, I work in the field of helping fathers, because the better our fathers are, the better our families will be. And this gentleman is a person that I respect, and I consider him almost like a digital mentor, but not anymore a digital mentor. And we have him on live tonight. The gentleman's name is Kenneth Braswell. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Fathers Incorporated, a widely recognized national and international nonprofit organization supporting fathers, practitioners, researchers, and policymakers that provides capacity building services to thousands of organizations working to ensure that fathers contribute to the healthy well-being of their children. He brings 29 years of collective work experience managing and leading fatherhood and community programs. Additionally, he serves as the National Director of the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse, directing and guiding the strategic activities of the NRFC. Throughout his career, he has managed over $70 million in fatherhood programming. He serves on several national boards and committees, including a board member of the Little Free Library. Let us welcome, for the first time, and definitely not the last time, but hopefully sooner, next time, Mr. Kenneth Braswell. And he's going to be chatting about a little bit of himself, a little bit about Fatherhood Incorporated, and a special event that's coming up on September 27th this month. So, Mr. Braswell, how we doing?
I'm doing okay, Dr. Vibe. It's been a long time coming. I've been following you, and you've been following me since my days in New York.
Yes.
Sometimes, we just got to wait, on God's timing. We never know why, he's orchestrating our lives in the way that he orchestrates it. But I am a committed servant and follower, and I go by the vibes, no pun intended, of his drum. And so I'm glad that those drum beats got me here with you tonight.
Well, I received that big time, and I'm speaking that this will be the start of a very long and prosperous, and I don't mean monetarily, but humankind journey for both of us and many others. So I like to say thank you for taking the time, as always.
Yeah,
it was
I tell you to be careful about that, because I got a lot on my mind.
Well, that's all right. That's all right. That's all right. I got a lot on my mind too. So nothing just happens, right? So
Right.
I have a feeling we're twin sons of different mothers. So
Yeah, absolutely.
good stuff. So before we go any further, I want to shout out to some people who are live right now on the Get Vocal platform. We have Big Bad Brad, Tony Davis, and Dre from New York City, who says he knows Mr. Braswell from New York City days. So I have a feeling in a little bit he's going to be jumping in. Also want to shout out on the Facebook Live platform, someone who I've not heard from in a long time, Marie Roker Jones, says, what is going on? So this is great. Like I always do when I have new friends, Mr. Braswell. I'm going to call you Kenneth. Can I call you Kenneth?
Please do, because
All
that
right.
will make
All
me
right,
older than I want to be.
All right. So Kenneth, can you share great bio, but let's get about the early days of Kenneth. Where did you grow up? Family, school, education. Take us back to the early days of Kenneth, if you would.
Ah, man, that's a stroll down memory lane. And I can only start that by how true Brooklynites will start that, which is Brooklyn in the house. We are in the house without a doubt. And so I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. My mom and my family is from Pine Tops, Rocky Mount, and Greensboro, North Carolina.
Wow.
And so she moved to New York at 17 years old or 18 years old with me in tow. And so her and two of her cousins who were leaving New York because two of them had, my mom and her cousin had babies out of wedlock. And so back then in those days, that was shameful, for our families. And she left and went to New York. And that's where I grew up most of my life in Crown Heights until we were a teenager. And she moved to Brownsville, where she still lives today. My daughter, my second daughter, actually still lives in the same building on the same floor that I grew up in Crown Heights, New York, her and my granddaughter. And so it started in Brooklyn. When I was 17, I went to Erasmus Hall High School. That's where I went to high school. Graduated from there, or didn't graduate from there, but went into the military because they had a program that you could leave high school early and go into the military and get your high school diploma. And so took advantage of that because I really wasn't feeling high school. Went into the military, spent 3 years in the Army. In that time, had my first daughter and my first wife. And so at 20 years old, came back to Brooklyn, stayed some time. The wedding, the marriage did not last very long. And I moved to Albany following a girlfriend, Albany, New York, and left, my daughter behind. And that was probably, as I described, one of the things in my life that if I could change, I would change that. I was young, not experienced, not understanding, not being very clear about what my absence would mean to my daughter, and paid for that later in life, when we connected back together. Fast forward, throughout the time that I was in Albany, New York, went to SUNY College, did some college work there, and started my community service in 1990. That's when I started my community service. And then those 29 years, I was on the boards of the YMCA, Big Brothers and Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Club, NAACP. I was a vice president of the Urban League of Northeastern New York. I published 2 newspapers and spent 10 years being a professional disc jockey on radio stations in Albany. And so met my bride in Albany. And so met her 7 years before I actually married her. We were actually just friends. So she saw me through all of my shenanigans. She watched me as I failed many times before I connected with her. And in 2004 began Fathers Incorporated at a time that I was struggling with the mother of my youngest daughter in custody court. And we came to a decision in court or after court that we did not want the government involved in raising our children, that we were both intellectual individuals. We didn't have, crazy drama and beef like most parents have when they break up. We just were moving, we're diverging, going in 2 different areas. And we decided we were going to raise our child and be the best parents we can be in our co-parenting situation. 20 years later, we've done an awesome job at that. We have an awesome daughter. Has never really felt, any father absence from me other than not living in the same house, consistently with me. And then 5 years ago, we moved to Atlanta, and I'll stop there.
Well, that's a lot there. A number of things I want to ask about those times. At 20 years old, that challenging time, what kept you going?
At 20 years old, I think it was ignorance of not knowing, but something in my spirit just kept me moving. And so I don't know. I didn't have any direction. I didn't have any guidance. I was just moving. I knew I had passions. I knew I had visions. I knew there were things that I wanted to accomplish. I knew there were things I loved. I love music. I love writing. I love talking to people. I love helping people. Did not know what all of those things meant. Also knew I had application. Like I was able to kind of understand things in a way, that most of my friends weren't thinking. I was forward thinking. And I wasn't a follower. I was a leader in my own rights. I was not influenced by my neighborhood or by my community. When I go back home now, it's a sad experience for me because I don't get to go home and do what others do and kind of hang out with your childhood friends and hang out with old families. When I go back to Crown Heights, almost everybody that I grew up with is either in prison or under the dirt. And so I don't have those kind of memories that I can go back, and really touch base with where I grew up. And so that's painful for me, not to be able to do that. Particularly, I'm envious of it, of my friends who talk about going to their high school reunion and going back to their community and hanging out with somebody that they went to kindergarten with and all of those kinds of things. And so I think at 20 years old, I knew that there was something in me. I knew that there was something about me. I just didn't know what it was. I really didn't know what it was. And I think it was, just the grace of God that kept me mindful that there was something in me, would not let it go until I figured it out.
Okay, well, I'm going to stay a little bit on the early Kenneth for a few reasons. Where did you, I guess there's a number of things. So let me look at it first. How much did your mother mean, especially in those days? How important was she in your journey?
I think if I was going to use a word with respect to my mother back then, it would be unappreciative. It was that I didn't really understand the value that she had in my life. She was more for me an annoyance at many times than a motivator. I think now that I understand my mom and I understand the time and I understand where we were growing up and those kinds of things, I think my mother was just always focused on taking care of her 3 kids. And that was paramount in her life. And so she worked a lot. She wasn't at home a lot. I was a latchkey kid. And my mother wasn't a talker. We weren't talkers. Our family weren't a talking family. We weren't a sit around the table, and eat dinner together family. We were go to your own separate corners. You kind of exist in your space and you come together, when you come together. Later on in life, she became very spiritual. Or religious, if you want to use that word. And, she spent a lot of time in church, and as a result, we spent a lot of time in church. And so, Monday was choir rehearsal, Tuesday was Bible study, Wednesday was missionary night, Thursday was the other choir rehearsal, Friday was church. Yeah. And then Sunday was church, and then Sunday afternoon was going to visit another church. And so that's just was my life, with my mom. And then the summers for me was much different. The summers for me from 6 years old, I think 6 or 7 years old, all the way up to 15 years old, every summer, the first weekend after school closed, I was on a Greyhound bus to North Carolina. And so, and I spent all of my summers on my uncle's farm, in Elm City, in North Carolina. And so my uncle and my family, still to this day, they just sold some of the acreage, but he had 200 acres of land in North Carolina. Yeah. And they harvested tobacco back when harvesting tobacco was the thing to do. And so back then, wasn't really clear why my mother was sending me, to North Carolina. But as I got older, I began to put together the pieces. One, there was no one to watch me in the summer, and she didn't want me hanging around my neighborhood getting in trouble. 2, we were unpaid labor, for my uncle, because it wasn't just me. It was other cousins that came in from Philadelphia and other places that came to live on that farm. And so I kind of understood that, again, my mother was doing what she had to do, to get through. Now, ironically, 2 of the times that I came to North Carolina, I came back to a brother and sister. So I'm going to assume that my mother was also living her life when I wasn't in New York. And that's okay. And that's good too. And so that was really, what I did and how we moved in those early days for me in Brooklyn and in New York, really trying to find myself and trying to really seek something that I didn't know what it was I was trying to find, but just existing and knowing that there was something in me that allowed me to be able to function and stay safe. And I know it now, just as God has having his hand on me. and not allowing me to do something that would get me in too much trouble, or derail me from my purpose. That I learned a lot being who I was as a young boy in Brooklyn, New York. I also learned a lot on that farm every summer, being around my uncle and around my cousins. And so I learned a lot of early lessons that today I cherish. So when you ask me about my mom, I think in my young self was extremely unappreciative of her. My older self is extremely grateful for her presence, her persistence, her stick-to-itiveness, her finding her own place, finding herself, and never giving up on us.
Wonderful. Before we go any further, some people saying hello. We've got at Happy Work Week on Periscope. We also have Luke on the Get Vocal platform and Lawrence on the Get Vocal platform. Thanks everyone for stopping by. If you're on the Get Vocal platform and watching, in a few minutes, I'll open up the room on any other platforms. Feel free, if you have any comments or questions to ask Kenneth, I will certainly relay them to him.
Yeah, Tony said we probably worked for R.J. Reynolds. Nah, Tony, we didn't make it to the factory. We was in the field.
Exactly.
We were the ones who were bringing the stuff to the factory to be manufactured, but we were in the field.
And Tony also says here he grew up 30 minutes south of Greensboro, North Carolina, near High Point.
I know High Point. I know High Point as well.
And Dre is saying, I lived next to the hardware store on Stone Avenue, Mother Gaston Boulevard. BK, baby.
I know that hardware store. My mother lives on right now. My mother lives on Mother Gaskin and Picken Avenue in the project.
Come on,
there, and I know that hardware store he's talking about.
Okay, that is fantastic. That is good stuff. You said at a younger age, you got the servant leadership, or serving became part of your core.
Mm-hmm.
When did that start to happen? Was it someone else that influenced you, or was it something you got into on your own?
I'm gonna answer that question, but Luke's got me laughing right now about the drive.
Yes.
Yeah, we used to. We definitely did that. It was also great for stickball, but we want that. I diverged. So the servant piece, ironically, I tell the story to people, and people, it's like, what? Are you serious? And I'm like, yeah. So I worked for this guy, and I always give him homage for awakening me, right? Because you never know, who's going to help you turn on your light. You never know who's going to help you discover your purpose, right? And so this guy's name was Jack Conway, Dr. Jack Conway. He was a anthropologist. I worked for him for the state of New York when I moved to Albany. And Jack was he was a jack of all trades. He was a writer. He was a philosopher. He had deep, deep wisdom. He had other degrees in both Irish history, as well as African American history and Native American history. So he was extremely learned, right? And so I used to sit in his office, and he used to have these conversations with me, particularly around Black people. And so when I moved to Atlanta in my early lives, that wasn't something that I really focused on. I didn't, I knew I was Black, but I didn't look at Black issues. I didn't look at things that was impacting Black communities and Black people and Black families. That just wasn't part of my scope. I was just trying to live for Kenny Braswell. I wasn't trying to live for anybody else. And ironically, Jack's father was the president of the Archdiocese in New York City. And he was personal friends with Malcolm X. And so Jack would tell me stories about how Malcolm X would come to his house to meet with his father, and they would sit in this room and drink coffee and just philosophize together. And he's talked about how Malcolm X really honed some of his conversations in public, bouncing them off his father, who was very prominent in New York City back then in the 60s. And he talked about how he would sit at the door and listen to his father and Malcolm X talk and have like conversations. And that was what really motivated him to get into anthropology and to really learn about cultures and learn about people. And he would just tell me these fascinating stories about Irish people and Native American people and particularly Black people to me. And the more and more he told me, the more intrigued I became about my own history. And as a result of that, began to start volunteering for some organizations in Albany, New York. The first one was an organization that planned what was called then the Empire State Black Arts and Cultural Festival. It was in Albany, New York. It was a statewide event. And for years and years, it took place on a Sunday in Albany. And in 1980, when I got involved, 1990, when I got involved in volunteering for that, it was my suggestion that we add another day to the festival, that we added a community day. And what we did was we added a community day on the Saturday. And I didn't know anybody from anybody except for people that I knew in New York City and names that I heard from people that the brothers used to cipher about on the corners, particularly the 5%ers, right? Because I read that, even though I never became one myself, I was read with them. I read the things they read. So at least I kind of understood, what they were talking about. But I would hear names like Van Sertima, and I would hear Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Naeem Akbar and Hakeem Mahabudi. And I would hear these names, Dr. Ben Johan. I would hear these names of these brothers. And I said to them, you know what? Most of them live in New York City. I said, I don't see why we can't get them to come up here and speak, on this Saturday, on this particular Saturday. And in 1991, at the first community event we had, every name that I just mentioned to you, I had at that festival and more. Dr. Bell was at the festival. I don't know why his name just jumped out of my head. With a C, got the hair gray. Tavis Smiley, can't think of it.
Cornell
West came up there, and it was just a cyclopedia of minds that came here to speak. And that particular day overwhelmed me with the information that I was hearing from them. And that was where I got submerged in understanding that there was something that I had to be in this space to make a difference for this particular community. And I just started serving. Like, everything that popped up in Albany, New York that needed a body, I was there. Whether it was Thanksgiving dinners, whether it was putting up tents for a church on this corner or speaking over here, I just got immersed in it. And as a result of that, Jack began to just pour more into me about what I was doing. And I would ask him questions and he would give me answers. And that's when I started my newspaper. Because one of the reasons I started the newspaper was because I believed that none of the newspapers was covering our community in the way that our community needed to be covered. And it was Dr. Jack Conway who said, start your own newspaper. It's a white guy, redhead Irish guy. He said, you don't like what the newspaper is doing, start your own newspaper. And I was like, I don't have a background degree to start a newspaper. He was like, learn, read, go to the library, get a book. He was that kind of guy. Like, if you want to do it, learn how to do it and go do it. And I did exactly what he told me to do. I went to the library. I looked at presses. I looked at publishing. I read about newspapers. I read about writing. I wrote. He would critique my writing. He would tell me about sentence structure and program structure and how to, write editorial as opposed to technical. And he would do all those things for me. And I ran that newspaper for almost 12 years before I gave it up. But in the meantime, doing that newspaper, I was doing all kinds of other things. I was working with the NAACP, the Urban League. I was mentoring. I was everything you could ask me to do, I was doing. And so that was somewhat, and I don't even know how we got all the way there. I think you asked me about being a servant, but that was really the genesis, of what happened and really got me into the space, of really thinking about serving. And in the midst of serving, that's when I began to recognize my gifts, my talents, and my passion.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Just want to shout out on the YouTube platform. There's someone that you know that's watching this live. I think you know a lady named Tamika
Yeah, I
Morrison.
know Tamika.
And a big shout out to Tamika. She is the representative from Fathers Incorporated that has made this happen. So much thanks to her. Big up to you, Tamika. Thank you. You are a pleasure to work with. So I just wanted to make sure that shout out got in. You were doing a lot of surveying, etc. When did the light come in your mind and in your heart that you wanted to create an organization, and why was it fathering that you choose?
Um, it was personal. It was me going into that courtroom with the mother of my youngest daughter. And at the time, I was the vice president of the Urban League. I was already doing that work. I was already doing workforce development, housing. I was already doing programmatic work. I had already been doing that. And so, in fact, yeah, I was working there, and I was actually also running the newspaper at the same time. And so, when she became pregnant, I rebelled for almost like 2 months because I had made a vow to myself that because of the failed relationship I had with my first daughter, that I was never going to have any more kids. I vowed that I was never going to have any more kids because I did
Wow.
not want to
Wow.
fail another child. And
Mm.
so when she told me she was pregnant with Nzinga, I went into a 2-month blackout where I just was wilding out. I mean, I'm talking. I mean, that time in my life is a blur, but I remember all of the um, reckless engagement activities and behaviors that I was engaging in because I don't even know what was going on with me. And I was dating a friend of mine and a friend that I was trying to date for, that one girl in your life that you try to date forever. She never pay you attention. And then one day she pays you attention and then you start dating. I was dating her and she lived in Delaware and I was running up and down the road literally every weekend to spend the weekend with her. And I was laying in the bed watching um, football game. It was a Sunday. I'll never forget this. I was laying in the bed, typical Sunday with her. She was cooking. I was watching TV and I just heard the voice. And God just said, this is not where you belong. Get up and go home. I mean, it was that clear. It was like someone was laying next to me and just whispered in my head, it's time for you to go home and stop this shenanigans. And I wrote about this in my book. I have a book, my first book, my book that I wrote on my life called When the Tear Won't Fall. Everything I'm talking to you about now is in that book. And I got up, I put my clothes on, I packed my bag, and I walked into the kitchen and I said, I gotta go. That's all I said is I gotta go. And she was like, where are you going? I'm like, all I remember saying is, I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta go. She chased me outside to the car. She could not understand, and I couldn't explain it. All I just kept saying is, I gotta go. I gotta go. And I left and I came back to Albany. And ironically, when I came back to Albany, my daughter's mother was in the hospital. She had dehydrated that day and she was in the hospital. So I was searching her down because she wasn't at an apartment. And I called her mother, and that's how I found out she was at the hospital. So I go up to the hospital. It's like 2:00 in the morning. I walk into the hospital past the attendants. Now, picture this. This is why I know God was in this. It's 2:00 in the morning. They had never seen me before. All of them looked at me, and none of them said anything to me. I walked right in, right past three attend. Now that says something about the hospital too, but I'm just gonna believe
Yeah.
God was just orchestrating this. I walked right past them, right into the room where she was. She was asleep. I grabbed her hand and I said to her, I'm here. I'm home. I'm sorry for whatever I did, but I'm here. And it was at that moment that I made the shift and commitment to be a better person, to be a better man, to be a better dad. And so I always tell people that it was my daughter Nzinga that saved my life, because it was just her um, being in this world, and not even in the world yet, right? That changed me like instantly. Like, it wasn't a transition, it was instantly that she changed. And I literally just, we moved in together. We did all the things that couple did. I went to all the hospital visits. I mean, all the doctor's visits. I read to her in the womb. We listened to to the sounds, to ultrasounds together. All of the stuff we did together. And I think that in all of that, that period in my life was the period that actually shifted me from thinking about and so when a year and a half later, when we broke up, it was the most devastating thing in my life, because I had made a commitment that I wanted to be with her for life. And God held the plans. Again, we weren't bad for each other. We just were moving in different spaces, and we had to make that decision. But in and of itself, it was just devastating for me. And in those courtrooms, I decided that I wanted to do something about what I saw in the courtrooms. It was dads on one side of the room and moms on the other side of the room, and I'm watching kids run back and forth. I'm listening to dads and moms yell and scream each other in the hallway. I'm looking at, it was just the most dysfunctional place I ever seen, in my life. And at that moment, it was something that I recognized, but it wasn't until I had a really bad breakup with another young lady about a year later that I thought my world was just like devastated, that I actually contemplated on taking my life, because I thought that I had failed God again. That I'm trying to like do the right thing. I'm trying to be the right person. Thought I was trying to be the right person for this person, and it didn't work. And I was sitting on my couch in my house, and I asked God, if you don't give me anything to get off of this couch tonight, I will not get off in the morning. Give me a reason to live. And he said to me, speak to the hearts of men. And that's where the motivation and spark became to think about what that meant. Because when he said it, I really didn't know what it meant. It took me about 15 hours to think about it. And at the end of 15 hours, I had written a 12-page perspective of Fathers Incorporated.
Wow.
In that moment.
Kenneth, thank you for sharing that story. That is a powerful story. So after the 15 hours, you look at this stuff. What did you do next? Like, you had this, for lack of a word, epiphany, and you put it from head and heart to pen and paper. What was your next move?
I went into business mode. I went into business mode. It was, now I have the blueprint. I know what it is I need. Now I have to create the infrastructure. I started calling people to be on my board. I went to the bank. I opened up a bank account. I got my EIN number. I started writing my bylaws. I started writing the charter for the organization. I started thinking about programs. I started putting together, because it was all my background. It is everything that I had done for the previous 15 years, programmatic activity. And so I went straight into creating the business itself. And I even have people who, like some of those early folks that I talked to during that time, when I speak to them, speak to me about how they remember the enthusiasm I had when I was calling them, talking to them about Fathers Incorporated and what I wanted Fathers Incorporated to do. Now, when I first started, I actually just wanted Fathers Incorporated to be a direct service agency where I was helping fathers with custody, visitation, and child support. And
Right.
so, but when I got into the work, realized that I could not help as many dads as fast as I wanted to. And that's when I folded off and began to start doing professional development work and capacity building training for human service agencies to help them understand the nuances of working with fathers. And that's kind of, we took that shift about 2 years. I took that shift about 2 to 3 years after I incorporated Fathers Incorporated, and then got a call from the state of New York to come and run the New York State Fatherhood Initiative. So that put Fathers Incorporated on the shelf for about 5 years.
Wow. Let So two things. In the early days, did you get any pushback? And if you did, what did you do? Well, in what we do, yes, that's a concept. But in the early days, um, did you get any pushback, and how did you overcome that pushback, especially in the early days?
And people they don't think about this. They think, this, it's almost like, and I've never pledged, right? I've never pledged a fraternity. I just heard about this, and that, they always kind of talk about how the pledges are soft these days because they don't go through the same things that the old brothers and sisters went through in pledging. I feel the same way about the fatherhood field. I think that people who are getting into this work today has the pleasure of being able to not have to resist the full pushback that we were getting 15 years ago. And so we're not even talking about a long time ago. We're talking 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I remember a professional woman in Jersey. I'll never forget this. And they were looking at bringing some fatherhood work into and they asked me to come down and speak to their staff. And their staff included some child support folks, some domestic violence folks, some workforce development, some TANF folks, a whole bunch. There's about 15 people in the room. And I had a PowerPoint presentation that I was doing to them. And in the PowerPoint presentation, I had a picture of Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston when Muhammad Ali knocked Sonny Liston down. And the slide was to talk about how on any given day, you will feel like Muhammad Ali and you will have conquered your biggest monster, your biggest challenge, your biggest obstacle, and you will feel like you are on the top of the world. And I said, and then there are those days that you feel like Sonny Liston, that you walked into the ring, you thought that this was going to be easy work for you. And the minute you walked in the ring, you found yourself on your back. Mike Tyson, for whatever people think of Mike Tyson, I just think he is a brilliant individual who just had a hard life and trying to figure out how to live his life. But Mike Tyson said something that I always keep in the back of my head when I'm engaging in this work. And his quote was, "Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth."
Yep.
And that is something that I always carried into the space as well. This woman lost it. And she went into, "I can't believe you're celebrating violence and you're talking about getting violent men back with women, and moms don't need men in their lives to beat them up." And she just went, and I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not even, you taking this all the way out of context. I was like, it's an illustration of how fathers feel when their children are born and they don't have access to their children and they don't have the means and the support to be able to connect, because there's a gatekeeper that they weren't expected that has a level of power over him that he didn't expect. And now he's on the floor looking up, trying to figure out, how am I going to get over this to get to what it is I want to get to? And she just would not yield. She was off the hook. Several years after that, she came to a conference that I was speaking at. And after I finished speaking, she came up to me, and I didn't know that she was the director of the domestic violence agency in Jersey. And she came up to me and she said, "Mr. Braswell," she goes, "You don't know me." She says, "And you probably will remember me." She goes, "Remember the woman who was at that meeting who yelled at you about the Sonny Liston, Muhammad Ali thing?" I said, "Yeah, I remember you." And I was trying to like, I wanted to say, yeah, I remember you. But I was like, "Yeah, I remember you." And she said, "I just want to apologize for my response that day." She goes, "I was out of line." And she said, and after I went home that night, she said that she was telling her husband the story. And she said her husband just like got into her about that. And he helped her understand. And she said, and ever since then, she said, every presentation that I do about domestic violence, she says, I use that picture to illustrate what you were trying to illustrate to me. And we both just started crying at this conference because for me, it was my silent victory. It was the tenacity of not allowing someone to devalue what it is I was trying to get them to understand. I wasn't trying to press, fathers into the lives of women who would create unhealthy or unsafe atmosphere. The only thing I was trying to convey is that fathers have a value to the raising of children that has to be recognized if you are an agency that is speaking about the benefit and outcomes of families. You are disingenuous if your agency has the word family in it and you are alienating dads. Those two things don't match. If you don't want to work with dads, then stop saying you're working with families, because you're not working with families if you don't want to work with dads. And like, she got it. And so those early years was a lot of that, a lot of verbal battles and strategic conversations with DV agencies and women agencies and feminist agencies that, when people began to start hearing about this fatherhood work, they would go right into mode of destroying your integrity and saying that you're trying to put women in danger and you're trying to put children in danger and all of those things. And I think it was, people like myself, folks like Ron Mincy and Jeff Johnson and Joe Jones and Jerry Tejo, and Al Pooley and others who are in this field of work out there trying to make sense out of what it is we were trying to do. And I think over time, those things have loosened up. And so while you may experience today some measure of resistance with who you're working with, you don't have to spend the amount of time tearing down the barriers before you even begin talking about the subject matter that you're there to talk about. And that's what we had to do then. I had to spend 45 minutes making them okay with listening to me before I even spoke to them about what it was I wanted to talk about with respect to dads.
Wow. And you know what, I can relate with that. And for those who know or do not know, I do work with fathers on a full-time basis. And whenever I share what I do with women, they get it.
Right.
Like 10 years, like you said, 15 years ago, that was an uphill battle. But they're more and more women, especially, are getting it, saying, this is needed. This is needed. This is needed.
Yeah, Tony's asked a question about, did I ask how and why? And yeah, I did. I think, it was, how am I going to do this, man? This is like some serious work, and I always tell people today, freedom ain't free. And so, like, how do you do great work without resources? And then I just began to learn that you do what you got to do with what you have until you get what you need to do more. And you don't ask, where your resources are going to come from, over the course of my career, good work has gotten me the attention of people that have provided me great resources. And so I stopped looking in the spaces that I thought had an obligation to support me. Because if you look in those circles, looking for people in your circles, like, why don't they want to come to my events? And why do they want to donate to my cause and blah, blah, blah? It's not their calling to do that. And so I think that when you do great work, great people who have great, synergy with what it is you're trying to do will figure out ways to support you in ways that those folks can't. And so, for me, the doing that, and then the last part of your question with respect to the mental and emotional battles for me, is difficult, getting up every day, and being out here in this world trying to advocate for men when you think people should get it. It's like, why am I having to fight so hard to talk about this valuable piece of our children's lives, and why don't people get it? Like, what? And then you start self-reflecting, because when you start self-reflecting, it's kind of like, whoa, people really don't like me because I'm a man. It's like, what is that about? How much hurt and stuff is out there in the world where people really have a negative emotion when it comes to thinking about dads and fathers? And then you lace on top of that, for many of us Black dads, and dads of color, and you got a whole nother thing that's going on that you have to battle with every day. My answer to that question is, every day I wake up, I have to say to myself that I'm worthy. I'm worthy for the work. I'm worthy for the job, and no weapon formed against me shall prosper. There is nothing out there that I fear when I step into the world. And over the last 15 years, I've built the language, I've built the resources, I've built the passion, I've built the company, I've built the credibility, all the things that I need to just run right through anybody who tries to discount this conversation that we're trying to have about the value of fathers in our children's lives. The benefit that I have today is now research and promising practices and best practice models are beginning to back up everything I've said over the last 15 years. I didn't have that 15 years ago. But the more we learn about the importance of fathers, the more we learn about the impact of fathers, the further we're going to get. And I think when it comes to women and moms, when you articulate to them and help them understand why we're important, help them get past the emotional bondage that they carry as a result of a hurtful relationship or an absent father relationship, many times you can get them to a logical conclusion where they understand that that relationship doesn't have anything to do with the relationship between the father and their children. My line with them is always, you don't have to be in a relationship to have a relationship.
True. It's interesting. I have a very good working relationship with a family court lawyer, and we were introduced to each other a few months ago. And one of the first things he said to me was so important. He said that all that fathers want is to be treated with fairness and respect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And within 30 seconds, I said, I'm gonna collaborate with this person because he just said it. Fairness and respect.
Mm-hmm.
It just like bam.
Mm-hmm.
It just hit.
Yeah, and that's the work, we did, just, and I'm like one of those guys. I hate stats and throwing stats in people's faces, but, sometimes you have to, because people want to know, stats and what are your quotes and your sources and all those things. Some people just want to know that. So you got to put that on the back end, but we did a survey not too long ago with one of our subcontractors, the Ad Council. And the survey came back and said that 97% of all dads say that when their child was born, it was the best day of their lives. And it's crazy because we all know that. That's true for almost every father who has a child. There's a couple of knuckleheads out there that, don't understand the joy of having a child, but not a lot. It's, the minority is such a small number of dads that are doing the absolute wrong thing, right? There are dads out there that are making mistakes. There might be dads that might be immature. There might be dads that, the light hasn't come on yet. There may be dads that have other motives. But at some point in everyone's life, the light comes on, and then life happens, so there's only a few of those other kind of fathers out there that create the imagery for all of the ones that are trying to do the best they can in their lives. I'm extremely literal when it comes to language these days, because I think we've allowed ourselves to rest on language that plants seeds in our head that makes us think different things about fathers. And I've evolved over time. There are terms that I've used 2 years ago that I refuse to use today because I've come into clarity with respect to what those terms actually say when I say them. And one of those terms is fatherless. And so there is no such thing as a fatherless child. Every child, 100% of every child has a father in their lives. Now, the question isn't if he exists. The question is where he exists. Now, he could be in the military. He could be deceased. He could be incarcerated. He can be disconnected. He can be a lot of different things. But the one thing he isn't is non-existent. Even if you were born out of a test tube, a father has something to do with that. And so if you use the term fatherless, it gives people the ability to say that there's a flaw in a child because they don't have a father in their lives. When you look at the census and when you look at statistics, they always say, so for instance, child, because they don't have a father in, 73% of all African-American children reside in fatherless homes. That's a different phrase. What it says is that dads are just not counted as a resident in the home. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's not in the home, right? And it damn sure doesn't mean that he's not in the life of that child. It just means that they're not in the child. But there's some folks in our space that will use that statistic from a deficit standpoint to make people believe that 73% of all dads are abandoning their children. And that's an absolute lie.
Agreed. You know that you're going to be coming for a part 2. You know that. I hope you realize that, because we're not going to get through. We're going to only get doing thumbnails tonight, but we're speaking. You can make time to come back for more.
And I'm going to shorten my answers now. So
no. Please do not. I want to make sure that you want to get everything out that you want to get out. That's important.
Yeah,
that's important. That's and I can relate to what you were saying when starting this up. That I just got started. I didn't know what I was doing. I just got started because I fully believe that I don't worry about what I don't have because what I have is good enough.
Yes, absolutely. So
I want to highlight on Fathers Incorporated on the services that you offer now compared to the services you offered when you first started. Because obviously it's grown. It's, again, congratulations for 15 years. And we'll be talking about something you're going to be doing, a document that you're going to be sharing with the public in the near future. But compare Fathers Incorporated today, September 5th, 2019, to the first few days.
The evolution of Fathers Incorporated, began with what I said earlier, which is, I'm a business servant. I'm a social entrepreneur. People are my business. Families are my business. Moms are my business. Children are my business. Dads are my business. And so those are how I count the successes of my bottom line, right? And so, but I also understand that, in order to scale up, that you have to have a business plan and a model in place to sustain the infrastructure of what's going to allow you to do what you do at greater scales. You know, the owner of or the creator of Burger King and McDonald's could have created their burgers and sold them just to the people in their confines, right? But that wasn't their vision. You know, their thing was, I want to sell a burger to everybody in the country. You know, but in order to do that, A, you got to have a plan. B, you got to have direction. And C, you got to have an infrastructure that's going to allow you to be able to manage the business to do that. And so if I say I wanted to work with fathers across the country and really have a profound impact on families across the country, I couldn't just stay in my basement and do this work. I had to start figuring out, how am I going to build an infrastructure that's going to get me out of this basement, you know, working with a few dads in my community. And so, you know, I began to start looking at, you know, services, right? What kind of services can we provide to bring revenue in? What kind of grants or foundations can we approach to bring in more revenue so we can do more work? What kind of contracts are out there that we can actually get and bring revenue into our organization? What are the streams of revenue that we can bring into the agency that will give us the ability to scale up? And so I've been very fortunate in being able to grow a business that has allowed me to serve a lot of families across the country. And so, again, 15 years ago, Dr. Vibe, I was in my basement in Albany, New York, with no salary and just trying to run Fathers Incorporated through the fingers of my computer, because I wasn't going anywhere other than periodically to speak. Everything that I was driving about my agency, I was driving through social media, emails, and talking to folks in that way. And 19 years later, we just 1 year ago signed the largest contract under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to provide fatherhood services for them across the country at $19 million.
Whoa!
And so,
Congratulations.
you know, and that's the third contract. That's not the first one. That's the third one. The second one was 13 million. The first one was 8 million, right? My New York work that I did was 11.5 million. The earn non-custodial income tax program was 17 million. And so when you take those things and add them together, I've managed over $70 million in fatherhood focused work around the country. So I always say that because I think people think I'm making up those numbers. I don't make up those numbers. Those numbers over the last 15 years are the things that I've had a direct hand on managing myself. I was the director. I wasn't working for somebody. I was either the director of the program or I was the director of the agency that was moving those programs. So that money that I talk about is monies that came through my fingers under my decisions to do the work that I was scaling Fathers Incorporated up to do. And so moving to Atlanta for us was about being able to get into an atmosphere that would allow me, you know, to branch out, to do more direct services, to get in an area that will allow me to be mobile around the country. From Hartford Airport, I can get a direct flight to any city in this country for cheaper than anybody else can fly anywhere around the country. And on top of that, it don't snow in Atlanta. And so that was the biggest, you know, for me moving down here. And so, you know, I employ 7 people now. We have a nice office in Atlanta. I have 50 staff around the country, plus subcontractors and consultants that do this work, including the Ad Council and Child Trends and Child Fund of America and ICF and MSG. We just signed the contract last week with the Center for Black Women's Wellness in Atlanta to work with 100 dads coming through their programs that are attached to their dads. In about a week, we're signing another contract under ODJJP to work with another 100 dads with the Urban League of Greater Atlanta. And in about 3 weeks, we're going to be signing another contract to work with dads attached to the Georgia Division of Child Support. And so you only do that within a business model. Ain't nobody giving you no checks on the corner just because you have passion to work with dads. People want to see your infrastructure. They want to see how you handle money. It's biblical. You're only going to get a few until you show your ability to steward little. And that's what I've always done. Steward and be a steward the little I had. And so that I would get more and be responsible for being accountable for the more I got. That's why I know this last one was just the tip of the iceberg. I don't know what the next one is going to be. In my brain, somewhere, somebody's going to give me a $20 million contract off the top, that. I'm expecting that. I'm drawing that from the atmosphere. I'm pulling it from speaking it. Someone is going to say, you know what? I love what you're doing. I love the impact you're making. I love how you got to where you are. I love how you've built your infrastructure. I love the impact that you're having. I want to see you do more, and I want to invest in you because I think that you have the ability to change the landscape of communities across this country with the business model that you've built to serve people. And that I wholeheartedly believe, and God has set that in my system. And so when you talk about me getting up every day and doing this work, even through Tony, the mental and emotional battles of how people think about who we are as men, as fathers, that thing in my system allows me to say, you know what, that's okay, because sooner or later we're going to take care of that too.
I receive that, and I claim that on you, my brother.
Thank you.
I claim it on you. When you know the why, the how it comes easy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's fantastic. Geez, there's so many different ways we could go. Let me ask. I could think this could be like a 20-hour conversation, so I'm going to limit it tonight. With Fathers Incorporated, is your demographic specifically Black fathers?
It's where my heart is.
Beautiful.
Right? I am a triage kind of guy. And I understand triage from Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn, growing up having asthma. And my mother would take me to Kings County Hospital, on Friday night in Brooklyn, which you can imagine what an ER looked like in New York City on Friday night, right? Or Saturday night, if it was Saturday. And the ambulance would come up to our house, Crown Heights, and she would call the ambulance, and the ambulance would come and get me and would take me to the hospital. And we would walk into the hospital, and there would be guys in there with gunshot wounds and knives still sticking in their chests and broken legs and people coughing lungs out and all kinds of things. And they would just always, I would come out and they would usher me right into the back every time. And as a youth, I used to always think, man, it's like, what is it about like my mom that gets me to jump into the front of the line every time that we come when people out here seem like they almost dying? And it wasn't until later on that I understood that respiratory issues are priority in an emergency room, because those are the individuals that are more apt to die, right? And have failure when your heart and you can't breathe, right? A dude with a knife in his side will last for a little while if they stop the bleeding from coming, or those kinds of things. And I understood from that vantage point that you serve people at the level of their need, right? Not the level of their desire, the level of their need. And so for Black families, fathers, if you look at statistics in the communities that I live in and grew up in, those are the individuals that are at the most need. Does not mean that I don't serve everybody else who comes into the ER that night. It just means that my priority is to get those who are at the bottom of the barrels to be able to rise to the top of the barrels. And unfortunately, there's so many of us at the bottom that when you look at my optics, it looks like that's all we do. Secondly, and I'm gonna end here because I see Dre's face now. I'm liking that cut, bro. It's looking kind of
I
tight.
appreciate it, man. Appreciate it.
And so I'm gonna end here. And that is, the service industry, right? Particularly the human service industry, is just as segregated as everything else in this country, right? And so, as much as I try to say, listen, there are some things that look like this is what I'm serving because this happens to be where I am, this is my community, but there are other things that are wide open that anybody could come in. You could read my book, you could read my children's books, you could do all those things. People are attracted to things that they are comfortable with, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. So the reality is, as much as I try in some spaces to be all inclusive, or at least to look all inclusive, at the end of the day, my demographics that walk through my door still look a certain way. And so while I don't say that all the dads I work with are Black, the reality of who we are, where we are, how we serve, and where we serve, this is what we look like.
Well, as you mentioned, your fellow Brooklynite, sorry, is in the house. So you know what? I'm just going to sit back and say welcome, Dre, and thanks for catching this conversation out and share with Kenneth. Go ahead.
Yeah, man, I wasn't going to miss it. When I saw that you was having him on, I said, I got to watch this. But I wanted to ask you a question, Kenneth. Did you get a chance to see the Dave Chappelle special?
Not yet. You know what? Okay. Because I've been waiting for, I love that Dave Chappelle.
Yeah.
He's second in my book. Richard Pryor's first. Dave Chappelle second, Richard Pryor's first. David Chappelle is the closest thing to Richard Pryor I've ever heard in a comedian. The closest thing to what I've ever heard. And I've been waiting for the perfect time to sit down and watch it. I don't want no distractions. I don't want my kids coming in. I don't want my wife on. I want to be able to watch it and narrow in on it. And so I have not seen it yet, but it's on my list to do.
So I wanted to ask you a question about something. And this is a conversation that I think should be had, right? Because with the work that you've been doing with fatherhood and motivating men, and I think, both of us believe that to build strong communities, you have to build strong families. And for you to build strong families, you have to build strong fathers.
Absolutely.
But he brought up a very interesting talking point, and it made sense when I was listening to it. And I thought about this a couple of years ago. I would never dare say it, though, because it sort of goes against what I believe as far as men stepping up to their responsibility, right? But he said, he talked about the situation of abortion, and he said that men, if you have a penis, he didn't use that word, but if you have a penis, you need to be quiet about abortion. It's a woman's body; they have the right to do what they want with it, right? He said, so if you have a penis, you don't have a say, okay? But then he said, he said that's fair. That's fair. If you have a penis, they got to hold a baby. It's fair. They don't want to hold that baby. If they want to get rid of the baby, that's fine. But then he said to the women, but to be fair, if you plan on keeping that baby, a man should be able, right, to be fair, not to pay for that baby. He said, if you can kill the baby, at least a man can do is abandon them. I was like, so I've thought about this, right, as far as the fairness about it. Women, and I'm not saying that women should not have rights, or I'm not saying that they should. I'm sort of like in between on that, because I'm not really a proponent of abortion as a means for a birth control, unless there's extreme situations like rape and things like that. But he brought up a very good point, and it sort of goes back to, because I'm passionate about fatherhood too, and it goes back to women having the right to not be responsible for a child if they don't want to by aborting it, right? In a situation of like a one-night stand. On the flip side, the father does not have that same right as well.
That's a slippery slope conversation.
So I want to hear your thoughts on that.
And so I think because there's all kinds of nuances that play into that.
Yeah.
You got to start considering rape victims, right? And you got to start, and who has the right, because you can't create law with options, right?
Mm-hmm.
Either it's the law or it's not the law. And I think that's what makes it very difficult, that to say one thing doesn't take into account some of the other situations that could take place. I'll say this, and because I don't, it's intriguing, and that's why I love Dave Chappelle, because he forces you to think, even if you don't necessarily agree with what he's saying, it forces you to think. But one of the things I think when it comes to that is that it's intention, right? And it's the mindfulness of the two people that engage in an activity, that they're both clear on the possibilities of what can happen, right? And so, but if you're planning, right? If you're planning that could happen, and if it happens, we're going to do X, or we're not going to do this, or you're going to do that, then everybody gets a say. Everybody gets to say something. Yeah. But if you walk into that situation and nobody is planning, and it just becomes something that happens, then all rules are out the door, right? And so you can't bring morals into a conversation after an act that was immoral. Right. And that's what people try to do. It's kind of like, no, once that happens, there was no rules. And so you can't make rules after it happens. The rules have to take place prior to, not after. And I think that kind of settles some of the conversation, at least in my head, when it comes to stuff like that. But again, it's such a topic that brings and draws people's emotions, right, around this subject matter of abortion, that oftentimes we can't even sit back to be articulate and critical about the seriousness of the situation and make decisions based on whatever the circumstance is, and understanding that every circumstance is a fingerprint or a footprint. Like, so one law for one couple don't necessarily manifest itself for another one, which is why you have judges and why you have courts. Everybody has to walk in, they have to plead their case, and then the judge is supposed to make the best decision based on those. None of those ever make it that far, but that's the system. That's how the system is supposed to work. I don't believe, to make statements like, women should have choices over their own body. That's an absolute, right? Men should have control over their own bodies. That's an absolute. The tricky thing about the conversation is the issue isn't about their bodies. The issue is about the baby.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. The issue is about the baby. Yeah. And we stop addressing the baby for addressing the mom and the dad, and we forget about the rights of the baby, which is why people are always talking about, when is a child a child, right? When is a baby a child, and at what point does that child have rights? Like, they haven't even gotten to that yet. Yeah. So it makes the other thing very difficult when we don't even know to the extent that a child actually has rights. I use this, Dre, and I'll stop here because this can go deep and down a slippery slope, right? I've said the same thing about child support, right? Child support belongs to the child, not to the parent, right? The child should have the option, right, at 18 years old to say, you know what, I'm good. I'm sorry that y'all relationship didn't work out, but that money is mine. And so Dad, I don't want him to keep going to jail because he can't pay arrears. And I don't want him to do X amount. A child should be able to have a say. Now, I get it. It's the child's money, but the mother earned it or not earned it, right? So that's another argument on the backhand side. But the child should have the ability and some weight in the conversation to say, I don't want my dad to go through what my dad is going through, even though my mom is still hurt by him after 18 years. Some sanity has to come to the conversation where people look at people and it doesn't become about dollars and cents, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't put relationships in a glass made of dollars and cents because it don't make sense at the end of the day. And so I think that this issue, Dre, and other issues like it just get caught up in people misdirecting what we're really talking about and getting caught up into things that ain't got nothing to do with nothing. And then we get so far down the line that people don't even know what they're arguing about anymore.
Yeah.
Colin Kaepernick is a perfect example. A perfect example of something that started out as and it got diluted by a number of different other things. And now people are online talking about, oh, wait a minute, I thought we were boycotting the NFL. And it's like, why?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we boycotting? Ezekiel Elliott just signed a $90 million contract, right? Most of the NFL are African-American players, and they're getting paid lovely, right? It is a business. Colin Kaepernick did a great thing. He recognized the platform, and he recognized that if I use this platform to make a statement, I can get this statement recognized. And if I'm going to do that, I have to recognize too that my career could possibly be in jeopardy by using this platform as a platform to move that message. He took that chance, and we supported him through that chance, right? And then he gets on the other end of the chance, and now he makes a deal, and he gets a check for an undisclosed amount. Doesn't tell anybody how much money he gets. The disingenuous side of what he's doing now in social media is talking about how he's preparing to play the game. Listen, if somebody used Fathers Incorporated as a platform to move something political, there's nothing I could do about that if they thought that my platform would get their whatever recognized. But if you are impacting my business, right, I get to fire you just like I fire anybody else in my office. And the one thing that's not going to happen is you ain't coming back, right? Because I didn't fire you because of your protest. I fired you because of the impact you were having on my business, right? Those are two separate things. And so it was a business deal all the way down the line. But when people have this conversation now, it's always attached to Kaepernick's job, which it didn't start out being about Kaepernick's job. It started out about bringing attention to an issue that was happening in a whole nother space, right? Police brutality and deaths and all those things. And people recognize it and things flew, which is what the civil rights became good at, using a platform to express an issue so that the broader public would have a compassion about what it was. I give you, and you got me on this space because it's a passionate conversation with us for our people. Yeah. Remember what King said about the children in Alabama that was being attacked by the dogs and the hoses. And the same issue with Emmett Till's mom. They said, America needs to see this. And their thing was, America needs to see this because it's going to have an impact on compassionate people to understand the situation that we're going through. They used a platform to advance an idea that would grab the hearts of the broader public to make change in the community. That's exactly what Kaepernick did, right? But King couldn't come back to Alabama and get a job on the police force, right? Or on the fire department or in any of those places because he impacted their way of life, right? And they get to say, I'm firing you because you impacted, my business, not because you put the cameras on us. Those are two different things. And I think that we just get caught up so much in like things that ain't got nothing to do with nothing. And they're distractions. I said to somebody the other day, they said, what's your biggest success today? And I said, my biggest success today is I ignore distractions. I don't allow distractions to derail me from the purpose in my life. The purpose in my life is to ensure that every child in this country has healthy access to their fathers and moms. And nothing is going to distract me from doing that. All these conversations, all these issues, all these other things that's going on, I am straightforward moving to ensure that no child has to wake up in the morning wondering where their father is.
Yeah.
Right? And having a mother so upset that she uses the child as a mechanism to punish him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's a distraction. Right? Anybody who uses their child as a weapon should reconsider them being parents.
Agree. Yeah.
Understood. Kenneth, I'm going to continue on and ask you.
Hey, thanks for the thumbs up, bro. Thanks for the thumbs up.
No problem. Trey, you can stay on if you want. There's
Okay.
2 other areas I want to get to with Kenneth before we start shutting it down. So Kenneth, I guess there's 2 other things I want to chat. I'll talk about the one that's furthest off, and then we'll end off with the event that's coming up. So let's talk about the blueprint.
So,
and go ahead.
So the blueprint is a campaign that we're building now, moving forward into the next 5 years, to begin to do what I'm describing as reimagining the narrative of the modern dad, right? And so today's dad is very different from dads from decades ago, even 5 years ago. You know, we are dealing with a different dad today. We're dealing with a dad who is more comfortable with doing the things with their children that has always been kind of, compartmentalized for moms to do. You know, dads don't have a problem with pushing their kids in a carriage down the mall without mom being there. They don't have a problem with changing diapers. They don't have a problem with taking paternity leave if their organization has paternity leave, right? They don't have a problem with staying home and not working if mom is making more money, right? And so these are very new kinds of dads, because a lot of those things with respect to men spoke to the definition and the expectation of masculinity and manhood in us, right? So we wouldn't do it, not because we didn't want to be a good dad. We did it because we didn't want anybody to think we weren't being a man, right? Again, distraction. We're not paying attention to what it is we're supposed to be doing. And so when you look at the generations, right? And so in this work, so when I talk about looking at 16 to 25-year-old dads, those are millennium kids. They're millennium dads, right? And they function a whole lot different than baby boomer dads and even Generation X dads. They're not the same kind of dads, and even the girls or moms are a different kind of parent. They're more apt to look at the situation and say, you know what? I need to go to college. I really don't want to take care of this child. You want to take care of the child? You can have him, right? That's where the younger set is. They're also less likely to marry. They're okay with not being married to have children. They're also okay for cohabitating for long periods of time and never getting married. They're okay with that. So the landscape of how fathers are functioning and being seen today is very different than it was 25, 30 years ago, which means service delivery for those dads have to be different, right? And so we got to start thinking differently about how we're trying to inform, educate the new dad right now. And so I'm talking about the millennials. However, we're now done with millennials. The millennial generation has been done for the last 15 years. So there's a generation behind them called Generation Z. That generation is now turning 16 years old, right? My son is a Generation Z. He's 10 years old. And I can tell you that there is a vast difference between how my son functions, right? And how millennial fathers and men function. These kids, there are a couple of different traits in these kids. One is that they are masters of technology. There is nothing that is in their heads that is unattainable, right? They have believed that every resource they need is within the fingertips of their hand, even celebrity, right? You can become a celebrity by getting a viral post in the middle of the night and end up on a reality show on TV and becoming an A-list star just because you posted something that hit the right algorithm and it's a by chance celebrity, right? So they all believe there's a chance to be in that. Dre said, yeah, or playing a video game, right? I forgot what they call them now. Now they can sit in their house, gamers. That's what they call them now. And there are kids who now have aspirations to do nothing but sit in the house and become good at Madden. And if they become good at Madden, can actually win a lot of money, never even getting on the football field. The second thing about these new Generation Z kids is they have absolutely no fear of authority. None. They don't have fear of their parents. They don't have fear of their community. They don't have fear of law enforcement. They don't have fear of the future. They have absolutely no fear whatsoever. Someone without fear is a dangerous person. And there is a generation of children that are coming up and they're becoming parents now. They're 16 years old, right? And they have no fear whatsoever. And so if you have that parent having a child, that child is going to be a challenge for us in our world just 15 years from now, because then they will be coming up and graduating, right? And those are going to be the kids that are going to be entering the work market. They're going to be creating new businesses. They're going to be changing the paradigm of the workforce, right? You know, the Department of Labor now is saying that it is the first time in history that they cannot predict new work titles in the next 10 years. They have no idea what is going to be existing in the next 10 years as a work title, like, because technology has just blown work titles out of the water. So imagine that there's no way to prepare your child for the future, which means college is not really an answer to doing that if they don't know what they're going to college for.
Yep.
Right. And so these millennial kids, so when you talk about where we're going in this blueprint, it is really to begin to kind of help us try to figure out, how do we work with, how do we educate, how do we cultivate, how do we nurture, how do we change, how do we train this new modern dad based on the realities of today, so that we have conscious men, compassionate men, committed men, right? Intentional, purpose-driven men that are engaging in relationships that are healthy for healthy outcomes of our children and families. And so we're putting all these bells and whistles around them. We're looking at the area of early childhood development, brain development, literacy. We're looking at health disparities. We're looking at parenting and co-parenting skills, communication, all of these things to kind of figure out how are all of these different spaces within this work of responsible fatherhood is going to change as a result of this new dad. And when we're done, we're going to have this thing that's going to be called the blueprint, that's going to talk about, how we need to begin to think about doing this work in a way that we've never done this work before.
That is interesting stuff. I'll certainly want to offline find out some more information about the blueprint, and if there's any way I could add positive value to it. Certainly very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I will reach in. I will reach in on both of you, because I'm going to be pulling in a lot of just thoughts and minds just to bounce off of people. And I probably, when you offered my ability to want to probably come back and just engage in a topic matter that allows us to kind of play it out together and talk about it. I'll kind of tell you what we found and what we talked about, and kind of really help me, because I can't do it. It's not going to come only from my brain and my work. It's going to come from, good people that I know out there that are doing this work, that can think innovatively, have done this work before, and really can help kind of really pull this together, so that practitioners behind us can actually come through and do a great job at providing services for families, and particularly fathers.
Wonderful. The final thing I'd like you to share with our audience about is a special event that's coming up on September 27th, 2019. That is, wow, I love it. I love this initiative, the Million Father March. Can you give some background about it and what it's all about, and how can people get engaged?
So I wish I could claim this great idea, but it was not mine. And so it was the birth child of our good and late friend, Philip Jackson, out of the Black Star Project in Chicago, who unfortunately passed away last November. He passed away from pancreatic cancer. And so Phil was a innovator before brothers were being innovative in this space. Phil Jackson was in front of the Black Male Achievement movement in conversation long before it became My Brother's Keeper popular, right? Driving the city of Chicago to really look at particularly Black boys and men in Chicago and how they were being served and how they were being brutalized in the city of Chicago. He was also a high level person in the Department of Education for the city of Chicago. Did some great work there, created what he called the Parent University in Chicago, which was an alternative PTA to the PTA of parents who were in the communities that felt that the PTA wasn't serving their children in the right way. He created a whole new structure of advocates and leaders in the communities of Chicago to have a voice in the school system, and that still lives today. Phil Jackson was also the creator of Take Men to Church, Take a Child to Church Day, Black to Church Day. He was extremely faithful and spiritual, and felt that boys should be exposed to spirituality regardless of what your spiritual background or your family. So it was called Take a Child to Church Day, but it was really take a child to the mosque, take it wherever you worship, to take a child to, and that was a huge. And then he came up with this idea about getting and encouraging dads to take children to school on the first day of school. And so he started that in 2007. I was actually with the state of New York when he started it, and him and I had a lot of conversations on really visioning what this thing was going to do and what it was going to look like. And so I was on board since day one before the thing even hit the ground. And so it really got a lot of leg and movement in the city of Chicago. And then in about 2 or 3 years, we picked it up in New York. And I ran it across the state of New York, and then it began to kind of pick up some national attention. In its heyday, the Million Father March took place in almost 700 cities around the world, not just in the country, but around the world. And it began to, slow down over the years. And then, unfortunately, when he became sick, wasn't able to continue to move it. And so myself, a good friend of mine, David Miller, who's in Baltimore, who was also a friend.
I know David Miller.
Yeah.
Yeah. You changed now on Instagram?
Absolutely. You're talking about brother, you need to get on your show. He's that kind.
No, actually, I was on a panel with David Miller up here in Toronto back in February, and it was the panel topic was how are Black fathers loving their Black sons. So so David brought the house, man.
Yeah,
he was dropping some serious knowledge bombs, man. So I know David well, so I will certainly reach out to him. But David is good people.
Yeah. And another friend of ours, Steve Vassar, who works for the campaign for Black Male Achievement with Sean Dove.
I know that name too.
Yeah. And so the three of us went up to Chicago last summer to meet, to go and see Phil, because he was in and out of the hospital at that time. Went to just go and hang out with him and show him some love and just let him know that, we were thinking about him. And we had we spent the whole day with him and had some really serious conversations about how he was going to continue to move his work. And that's where he shared with us the severity of his health. He hadn't told anybody. He told us then the severity of his health when we were there. And in a conversation, the conversation with, well, what could we do? And we just started talking about his programs, and he just turned to me and said, Ken, the Million Father March. He was like, you got that, we've been doing this since, 2007. You the master. He's always called me the master. You the master of making things happen. He says, just pick it up, man. Just pick it up, man. Just make it happen. Just take it and run with it. And I was like, I'm like, serious? He was like, yeah. And so we just, over time talked about it, came to an agreement that Fathers Incorporated was going to take over the Million Fathers March and kind of continue the legacy of that moving forward. And so we do this work in honor of him. It wasn't, me filling a void or him not being there. A lot of people don't even know our relationship. Our relationship was close. We talked all the time, and it's my way of keeping his legacy moving. It's actually my attempt to do the same thing for him that in a similar situation I would want my closest brothers to do for me, and that is to not allow my work to die. And so I think we all should be doing that. We should not let work die when one of us, leaves this earth. We should always be thinking about how we continue to move legacy. But anyway, fast forward. Last year, we picked it up. We were in 91 cities around the country. We created a theme called Real Dads Read because we wanted the schools to begin to start engaging and really advancing and highlighting the importance of dads reading with their children. And so we began to put some programmatic work around this by really looking at how do we get schools to engage fathers throughout the entire year, not just on that particular day. And so we began to start encouraging them on that particular day to sign dads up for PTA, PTO, hall monitors, school crossing guards, mentors, coaches, lunchroom attendants, mystery readers, to really engage fathers to be more involved in the educational lives of their children. And then this year, we just took it up a whole nother notch, where we're really having some intimate conversations with a lot of the schools. We're now in, our last count was 71 cities. And so that have registered so far. So we don't know where it's going to end, but it's at 71 now. But we've actually begun to collect data in terms of how many fathers we're impacting and how many children we're impacting, because they all report to us their anticipated impact. And so we're up to, I think, 57,000 dads that are going to be impacted this year.
Excellent.
And a little over 400,000 children that will be impacted by that particular program at the school. We've picked up 4 school districts across the country: San Bernardino, California, Philadelphia, PA, Baltimore, Maryland, and I can't remember. Muskogee, which is in Columbus, Georgia. And so typically we also have Atlanta and a couple of others. They just slow to come in. And so ultimately what we want is this thing to be in every school, in every city, in every state, around the country, where we're being intentional about encouraging fathers to engage in the educational lives of their children. So we're excited about that. Information for the Million Fathers March could be seen at www.millionfathersmarch with an S, fathersmarch.com. Or you can go to our website at fathersincorporated.com and hit the link and go to millionfathersmarch.com. And so great pictures, great video, great optics. We've already had several schools plan their events already, because even though the 27th is the day, some schools pick other days given their schedule and the things that they're going to do. So we actually went out to Omaha, Nebraska for their launch with Brother Willie Hamilton and Black Men United. And so they had several schools in Omaha, and then now they have, as a result of us coming there and being all over the news, all of the rest of the schools are going to engage in it on the 27th. And so, so we're just excited about that optics again. It gives us platform. It gets us deeper into the space. It brings on more advocates for the work of responsible fatherhood. It allows people to be more intentional. We get to educate individuals on the importance of bringing dads together. And we create an atmosphere that fathers can create more deeper and more nurturing bonds with their children. So it's an awesome program. I'm hoping that we're doing all the things that Philip Jackson intended for this program to do. But we've just begun. We have a lot of plans for what this thing ultimately is going to be.
Well, God rest Mr. Jackson's soul. And I know that he is in a better place and very happy to see what you and the team are doing. And you said something that it's very important, legacy. And I firmly believe that every success needs a successor.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that that's absolutely fantastic. And I'm going to just put this question out there. Are you thinking about taking this day international?
You know, we haven't gotten any bites internationally, although he did have some schools internationally. I did a funny story, very quick story. Me and my wife was in Virgin Islands. It's probably 6 years ago now, maybe 5 years ago. We were there for a Head Start conference. And we were going to somewhere on one of these little buses. And we were coming back to the hotel, and we were passing the school. And on the side of the fence of the school was a big sign that said Million Fathers March, and it had the date on the bottom of it in the Virgin.
Wow, nice. Wow.
Yes. I stopped and turned around so I could get a picture of it. School was closed because it was a Saturday, I think it was. But the poster was on it, which meant that, you know, his work had permeated outside of the continental US, and people actually saw it. And that was at a time that social media wasn't as hot and moving as it is now. And so it hasn't picked up internationally yet, but it's only a matter of time, you know, before we start getting some phone calls of people around the world saying, this is a great idea, something we want to do. We just got to be consistent with it, keep pushing it, knowing that it's going to fall in the laps or hands of somebody. And the next thing you know, this thing will be worldwide. So
wonderful. Well, I know you've had you're in the middle of a long day because you said you get started in the afternoon, but you're still in the office, and I'd like you to get home to your family. So
trust me, my family is knocked out. They've been knocked out for the last hour. They're not like me. They early to bed. They early to sleep, early risers. I'm the exact opposite. I'm late to bed because even if I was home, I would just be getting started. I'd be probably sitting because the house is quiet now. I'd be in my office and the TV would be on, and I'd have the laptop in front of me, and I would be doing some piece of work. I'm actually working on working on a training that I have to do in a couple of weeks on engaging women in the field, engaging women in the field of responsible fatherhood. And so it's a training that I've done before, but I was looking at the PowerPoint the other day, and I think I've done it in about 2 or 3 years. And I was like, man, I got so much other thoughts that I want to put in this thing. And so before I got on the phone with you, I was actually pulling that thing together. I'm like, oh, this is going to be hot. This is going to be good. So I'm training like 10 women practitioners in a couple of weeks. I'm working with dads here in Atlanta.
Wonderful. Well, as we wind down our conversation, what message do you have out there about fathers to the women out there, and what message do you have to the kids out there, and what message do you have to the fathers out there when it comes to fathers? So 3 different groups, because I know that this conversation is going to be watched by a wide demographic. And I know that the message will probably be different for each group. So share what you'd like to say about fatherhood at this point in your journey, the Fathers Incorporated journey, Real Dad Free journey.
The message to all 3 groups are the same. The context is just different. And so the message to all 3 groups is don't give up. Don't give up. And so for moms, it is, don't give up on him. It's easy to make excuses why you don't want him in your life, but it's not so easy to make an excuse to why you don't want him in your child's life, unless there's a circumstance that won't allow that to happen. And the only one I see is when either you or the child are in danger, right? And if that's not the case, then I can't come up with another reason that a father shouldn't be in the life of a child. And so to moms, don't give up on him. Even though he may not, be what you want, and he doesn't show up in the way you want him to show up. Allow him to be able to show up in a way that his child needs him to show up, because those are two different show ups. He doesn't really need to show up in your life. His obligation is to show up in his child's life. So give him access, give him encouragement, give him inspiration, and give him the opportunity to be able to do that. That is going to benefit your child in the long run when you allow that to happen. And emotions can't be totally ignored. But we as humans have the ability to set aside our emotions when we want to set aside our emotions for the things that we want in life. And so you just have to want this relationship with your child more than your desire to keep him alienated from his child's life. And so to moms, I would just say, don't give up on him. His input, his impact is extremely critical to the life of that child. And there's all kinds of research out there that talks about the benefit of healthy relationships with fathers and their children. And those things are just not made up. They are real. They are really, really real. And you should pay attention to those things. To children, it is almost similar. Don't give up on him. Don't be so quick to want to replace. To be quite honest with you, you cannot replace your father. You can compensate for him, but you cannot replace him. And so another man certainly can come into your life and could be a healthy male role model in your life. Can give you all the things you've ever dreamed of, could give you motivation, can set you up for life, and can really in your life feel like a father. Might be a daddy, but he ain't a father, because there's only one of those. You only got one. And so you can get up on a podium at graduation and say, I want to thank the person who was served as my dad for all my life. And that would be a statement that would make a lot of sense. But the statement that you can't make is, he has served as my father. And no one can serve as your father but your father. And when you think about that, it gives you space to allow forgiveness for a father who did not show up in your life the way you wanted him to show up in your life. And so when you are a child and you're dealing with a level of father absence, because again, I said this earlier in the show, there is no such thing as fatherless. 100% of all children have a father in their lives. The question isn't if he exists. The question is, where is he? And so as a result of that, you have to ask the question, where is he? And be bold, be courageous to ask the people around you, where is daddy? Where is he? And so that they can give you answers to your questions, because what I can tell you is those questions are never going to go away. You can ask adopted children who were raised by the best adopted parents in the world. Again, they compensated for parents, but they did not replace parents, because one day, no matter how great they are, that child will come into the house and say, I want to meet my parents. And it is because of this. I'm not a scientist, but I believe this to be true, and I've always used it, and I'm going to keep saying it until someone tells me it ain't true. I believe DNA chases itself. I believe that when you are connected to somebody by DNA, there is a universal attraction that continues to make you want to attach to them. And so there is no other DNA that is more bondable and closer than the DNA you receive from your parents. And so as a result of that, don't give up on him. Give him the space to be able to come back into your life and serve in a way that he may not understand that he could even serve in, or give him the ability to be able to grow in that space, because he's not going to be the dad you want on the first day. That's a relationship like all other relationships that you got to allow to manifest itself. And for dads, don't give up on yourself. And certainly don't give up on your kids. And so I think that for dads, the way it happens is we do give up on ourselves. And as a result of giving up on ourselves, we give up on our kids. And so I don't think it's the other way around. I don't think it's we give up on our kids and then we give up on ourselves. We give up on ourselves because we don't believe we have the capacity. We believe that all odds are against us. We believe that there's no services for us. We believe that our kids don't care. We believe that moms will never allow us. We believe that the courts is never going to give us custody. We make all kinds of excuses not to be in our children's lives. The problem with that is the longer you make those excuses, the harder it is for you to climb over those excuses. It's like digging a hole. You keep digging the hole of denial and then trying to figure out why you can't climb out of it to actually see your child when you dug your own hole. It's why, and countless men I talked to who were out of the lives of their children, and at some point they say, over time, I just believed that my child didn't want me in their lives. You don't know that. But because you waited so long, what the reality is you just don't know what to say. And you don't have answers for a child that are going to ask very specific questions that not that you don't have answers for, but the answers are never enough for the question. So why didn't you look for me? There's no answer for that. No matter what you come up with, it's going to be a dud. Why didn't you fight for me? No matter how you answer that, they're not going to be satisfied with it. But what they will be satisfied is that you're available to answer the question, right? Because from that point, you can build on it. From that point, you can start forgiving. From that point, you can start living in explanation. And at that point, you can start living in redemption. You can start from there. They say the next step is the beginning of the next journey. And so it's being mindful of the next step, not the last step. It's the next step. Where are you going when you take the next step? So don't give up on yourselves. And so because giving up on yourselves doesn't give you the ability to be present for the people who need you the most. And in this case, it's your children.
Great way to end another epic conversation. We are running down a little bit loose on time in regards to the recording, so we're going to make it right quick. Kenneth, thank you so much for taking time to share with us today. Give the website information again for Fathers Incorporated and the Million Fathers March.
So the easiest way to get me is Google me. And so if you Google Kenneth Braswell or Fathers Incorporated, we pop up all over the place. And if you get to the website, you can get to everything else. But the key words to remember that get you closest to me is Fathers Incorporated and Kenneth Braswell. And so all of our Twitter accounts are Fathers Incorporated, well, with the exception of Twitter, which is Fathers Incorp. Instagram is Fathers Incorporated. Kenneth Braswell is Instagram. And I forgot, and on Twitter, it's actually backwards because there's another Kenneth Braswell that got my Twitter account. And so it's backwards. It's Braswell Kenneth on Twitter. But again, themillionfathermarch.com. All of those things can be attached to us if you just simply Google me and Google Kenneth Braswell or any of the works that we do. We pop up all over the place on search engines. So that's the easiest way.
Good stuff. Before we sign off, I'd like to say thank you for everyone who joined us for any part of this conversation. Luke has been here for a while. We had Tony Davis. We had Austin. We had Lawrence Wilbon, who stopped by for a little bit. Of course, we had Dre. We had Big Bad Brad. We had, and of course, on the Facebook side, Rodney Kellum did stop by. Said, you finally got in touch with him. I said, yes, I did. And also Serena Wills. I know some other people jumped in also. Just trying to do a quick check. Louise Noel Ambrose, Deborah Fuqua, and others jumped in. I'm Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations. If you want to find out anything about me, just simply go to my website, thedrvibeshow.com. You'll get all the information there. As always, I like to say you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles, and you're a solution for someone's problem. God bless. Peace be well. Walk good. And remember, aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. And we won't wait as long to have Kenneth back. God bless. Peace be well and keep the faith. Good night, everybody.